There is a quiet pattern that repeats itself whenever something meaningful survives for too long inside human culture, where what once unsettled the inner life slowly becomes familiar, then respectable, and finally distant, until the symbol remains intact, but its psychological gravity has almost completely disappeared. We continue to speak the same names, repeat the same stories, preserve the same images, and yet the experience they once pointed toward no longer arrives, as though something essential has been carefully preserved in form while being subtly evacuated of its inner force. This absence is rarely noticed directly, because familiarity has a numbing quality, and what is repeated often enough begins to feel understood, even when it has never truly been encountered at all. In this sense, the problem is not disbelief, but comfort, because symbols that once disturbed consciousness are often kept alive precisely by being rendered harmless, stripped of their capacity to confront the individual with something psychologically demanding or destabilizing. It is here that a quiet discomfort begins to emerge, not as doubt or rebellion, but as a subtle sense that something is being spoken about endlessly, without ever being experienced inwardly, as though the language survives while the inner event it once described has quietly withdrawn. When Carl Jung reflected on Christianity, he was not primarily concerned with doctrine, morality, or belief in the conventional sense, but with the strange psychological fate of symbols that become institutionalized, and with what happens to the human psyche when images meant to transform consciousness are instead frozen into external truths. From this perspective, Jesus does not appear first as a religious figure to be worshipped or rejected, but as a symbolic disturbance, an image that once demanded inner confrontation and psychological reorganization, and that may have become safer precisely because it was interpreted in ways that redirected attention away from the inner life and toward belief, obedience, and historical certainty. This does not mean that something was maliciously hidden, nor does it suggest a secret doctrine concealed by force, but rather that human consciousness itself may resist certain kinds of knowledge, especially when that knowledge threatens the stability of the ego and the narratives through which identity is maintained. What is often misunderstood here is that symbolic truth does not behave like information, because it cannot simply be learned, agreed with, or repeated without consequence, but instead demands a kind of inner participation that is psychologically costly and therefore frequently avoided. For this reason, misinterpretation should not immediately be understood as error, but as adaptation. As a way the psyche protects itself from encounters, it is not yet prepared to endure, preserving the symbol while altering its function. The unease that follows from this is not theological, but deeply personal, because it raises the possibility that what was lost was not meaning itself, but the individual's relationship to meaning, and that this loss may still be repeating quietly within modern consciousness. If that is the case, then this is not a discussion about belief or disbelief, but about recognition, and about whether something in these ancient symbols is still capable of addressing the inner conflicts that remain unnamed, unresolved, and strangely familiar. To understand why Jung believed Jesus was misinterpreted, it is necessary to step away from the question of belief entirely and enter a different psychological register, one where religious figures are not treated as historical problems to be solved, but as symbolic events that occur within the structure of human consciousness itself. In Jung's view, symbols are not decorative metaphors, nor are they primitive attempts at science, but living psychic realities that emerge when consciousness encounters something it cannot fully grasp, something that exceeds rational containment and therefore expresses itself through image, myth, and paradox. From this perspective, figures such as Jesus, Sophia, the Demiurge, or the Archons are not external entities operating somewhere beyond the world, but symbolic representations of inner processes, tensions, and configurations of the psyche, describing how consciousness relates to itself, fragments itself, and occasionally becomes aware of its own limitations. Jesus, in particular, appears not as a moral ideal or theological solution, but as a symbol of the self, a psychological image of wholeness that confronts the ego with the fact that it is not the center of the psyche, nor the ultimate authority within the individual. This confrontation is not comforting, because the ego survives by maintaining coherence, control, and narrative continuity, whereas the self represents a larger totality that relativizes the ego's importance and exposes its partial, constructed nature. For Jung, this is where the danger of the symbol begins, because when an image points toward inner transformation rather than external guidance, it threatens the structures through which identity, certainty, and moral superiority are maintained. Gnostic language understood this danger intuitively, which is why it described reality not as a neutral creation, but as a divided psychological field, where consciousness finds itself trapped inside systems it did not consciously choose, governed by forces that operate automatically and impersonally, and experienced subjectively as fate, compulsion, or unquestioned belief. The Demiurge, in this sense, does not represent a literal false god ruling the cosmos, but the organizing principle of ego consciousness itself, the part of the psyche that mistakes its limited perspective for total reality and defends this illusion with absolute certainty. The Archons function similarly, not as supernatural jailers, but as recurring patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior that regulate perception without awareness, shaping what feels normal, acceptable, or real, while remaining largely invisible to the individual experiencing them. When these symbolic ideas are read literally, they appear absurd or conspiratorial, but when read psychologically, they describe something deeply familiar: the way human beings live inside inherited meanings, unconscious assumptions, and conditioned identities that feel self-evident precisely because they are rarely questioned. This symbolic framework is essential for understanding Jung's concern with Christianity, because the early symbolic tension at the heart of the Christ image demanded an inward movement, a confrontation with the ego's limitations, and a recognition that redemption was not something granted externally, but experienced internally as a painful reorientation of consciousness. However, such an interpretation is psychologically demanding because it removes the possibility of passive salvation and replaces it with responsibility for inner conflict, contradiction, and transformation, all of which the ego instinctively resists. It is at this point that misunderstanding enters the picture, not as ignorance, but as defense. Because symbolic truths that threaten ego stability are often translated into forms that preserve the image while neutralizing its psychological impact. Historically, this meant that the figure of Jesus gradually shifted from a symbol of inner transformation to an object of belief, worship, and moral imitation, allowing individuals to relate to the image externally rather than encountering its meaning within themselves. Once belief replaces experience, the symbol becomes safe because it no longer demands psychological participation, only agreement, obedience, or identification with a collective narrative. Jung observed that this process is not unique to Christianity, but repeats wherever symbols outlive the consciousness that produced them, resulting in traditions that appear spiritually rich while functioning psychologically as systems of control, reassurance, and identity reinforcement. The tragedy here is subtle, because nothing appears to be lost on the surface. As rituals continue, texts are preserved, and doctrines are refined, yet the inner tension that once made the symbol transformative quietly disappears. This misunderstanding is not confined to history, because the same dynamic unfolds within the individual psyche, where inner symbols are often externalized, projected, or literalized to avoid confronting the conflicts they represent. In this sense, the misinterpretation of Jesus is not something done by institutions alone, but something that repeats whenever the ego encounters a symbol that threatens its autonomy and responds by turning it into an object of belief rather than a mirror of inner reality. What Jung recognized was that this pattern is not accidental but structural, because consciousness evolves slowly and symbols often remain long after their original psychological function has been forgotten or rendered intolerable. Rather than correcting this misunderstanding, Jung chose to observe it, recognizing that misinterpretation may be the price paid for preserving symbols across generations, even if that preservation comes at the cost of their transformative power. And it is here, quietly and uncomfortably, that the question begins to turn inward, because the same process that reshaped ancient symbols may still be shaping how modern individuals relate to meaning, suffering, and the unexplored depths of their own inner lives. As Jung followed this pattern further, he became less interested in what Christianity claimed about salvation and more concerned with what happened psychologically when individuals related to symbolic material without inward participation. Because symbols that are no longer lived internally do not disappear, but instead reorganize themselves as unconscious forces. When inner meaning is avoided, it does not dissolve, but returns indirectly, often as anxiety, restlessness, depression, or a pervasive sense of alienation that appears personal on the surface, while being rooted in a deeper symbolic disconnection. From this perspective, much of modern psychological suffering does not arise because something is wrong with the individual, but because consciousness has lost its relationship to the symbolic language through which deeper layers of the psyche communicate. What was once encountered as myth, ritual, and inner narrative is now experienced as mood, symptom, or vague dissatisfaction, stripped of meaning and therefore felt as pathology rather than message. Jung did not interpret these states as failures of adaptation, but as signs of inner tension between the ego and the unconscious. between the identity one has constructed and the deeper totality that remains unacknowledged and therefore increasingly disruptive. In this sense, the Christ symbol, when reduced to belief alone, no longer mediates this tension consciously, and the psychic conflict it once symbolized reappears elsewhere, often in forms that feel arbitrary, overwhelming, or meaningless to the modern individual. The Gnostic insight here was not that the world is evil in a literal sense, but that consciousness finds itself embedded in systems it did not choose and rarely questions, governed by patterns that operate automatically while presenting themselves as natural, inevitable, or morally unquestionable. When Jung spoke of the Demiurge psychologically, he was pointing to the organizing principle of ego consciousness that structures reality according to utility, survival, and control, while mistaking this partial ordering for absolute truth. The Archons, in this symbolic reading, describe the repetitive, autonomous patterns that enforce this order, not as external tyrants, but as internal regulators of perception, belief, and behavior that shape what the individual experiences as normal, real, or possible. These forces do not announce themselves as control, because control that is experienced consciously tends to provoke resistance, whereas unconscious conditioning operates most effectively when it is mistaken for personal choice or objective reality. Religion, culture, ideology, technology, and identity all function within this symbolic framework, not as enemies to be destroyed, but as systems that stabilize consciousness at a certain level of development, often at the cost of deeper awareness. Jung was careful here, because he recognized the danger of turning symbolic insight into rebellion or superiority, since the moment awareness becomes an identity, it hardens into another structure of control. For this reason, he emphasized recognition over resistance, understanding that unconscious patterns cannot be dismantled through force, denial, or moral outrage, but only through sustained awareness that allows their automatic authority to weaken gradually. This is why the idea of Gnosis, as Jung understood it, cannot be reduced to knowledge, technique, or method, because the moment it becomes something one possesses, it ceases to function as awareness and becomes another ego achievement. There is no procedure for encountering symbolic truth, because such encounters arise spontaneously when consciousness reaches the limits of its existing framework and is forced to confront what it has excluded or suppressed. Any attempt to systematize this process inevitably transforms it into self-help, spirituality, or ideology, all of which promise comfort, improvement, or certainty, and therefore undermine the very tension that makes symbolic encounter possible. Jung resisted this impulse deliberately, refusing to present psychology as a path to enlightenment or wholeness, because he understood that the psyche does not move toward harmony through instruction, but through conflict, contradiction, and the slow integration of what was previously rejected. In this light, the misinterpretation of Jesus appears not as a historical failure to be corrected, but as an ongoing psychological pattern, where symbols that demand inner transformation are repeatedly externalized to preserve ego stability and social coherence. This pattern does not end with religion, because it reappears wherever meaning is delegated outward, whether to belief systems, experts, algorithms, or identities that promise orientation without requiring inner engagement. The modern individual may believe themselves to be liberated from religious authority, yet remain deeply governed by unconscious narratives that dictate value, success, worth, and identity with equal rigidity and far less symbolic transparency. What has changed is not the presence of control, but its form, as symbolic language has been replaced by technical language, moral language, or psychological language that describes experience without opening it. Jung's concern was that without symbolic mediation, consciousness becomes increasingly literal, increasingly identified with surface reality, and therefore increasingly vulnerable to unconscious influence, because what is not symbolized cannot be integrated. In such a condition, the psyche compensates, often through crises that feel personal, but originate from collective symbolic impoverishment, leaving individuals to suffer conflicts they experience as private failures rather than expressions of a deeper human pattern. This is why Jung refused to offer solutions, methods, or programs, because doing so would repeat the very misunderstanding he was attempting to illuminate, turning recognition into reassurance and awareness into doctrine. Instead, he remained attentive to the discomfort itself, recognizing that the unresolved tension between ego and self, belief and experience, control and awareness, is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be endured consciously. And it is precisely this endurance, this refusal to prematurely resolve symbolic tension, that keeps the possibility of inner transformation alive, even when no clear path, certainty, or conclusion is available. At this point, nothing needs to be concluded, because the problem itself does not move toward resolution, but remains suspended in the same way certain questions linger in the psyche long after the words that introduce them have faded. What remains is not an answer about Jesus, Jung, or Gnosis, but a quiet tension between symbol and certainty, between inner experience and external explanation, that refuses to settle into something comfortable or final. If the misinterpretation of symbolic figures has persisted for centuries, then it may not be because humans are incapable of understanding them, but because full understanding carries a psychological cost that most consciousness is not prepared to pay at all times. Seen this way, misunderstanding is not merely distortion, but delay, a holding pattern that allows symbols to survive even when their original meaning threatens the stability of the inner world. The image remains, the language remains, the story remains, but its deepest demand is postponed, waiting for a moment when consciousness is capable of encountering it without immediately turning it into belief, rejection, or explanation. This reframes the question entirely, because instead of asking what was hidden or lost, one begins to wonder what is repeatedly avoided, not historically, but inwardly, whenever symbols approach the edge of personal relevance. There is something unsettling about recognizing that misunderstanding may function as protection, because it suggests that clarity is not always desirable, and that confusion can sometimes serve as a necessary barrier between the ego and experiences that would otherwise overwhelm it. From this perspective, the symbolic tension surrounding Jesus does not belong to the past, nor to religious institutions alone, but continues wherever individuals encounter images, ideas, or experiences that threaten to reorganize their sense of self. What matters then is not whether one believes differently, but whether one notices where meaning has become safe, familiar, and psychologically inert, no longer capable of disturbing the narratives through which identity is maintained. The discomfort that accompanies this recognition does not demand action, correction, or rebellion, because any attempt to immediately do something with it risks neutralizing it once again, turning recognition into control. Instead, what lingers is a question that does not ask to be answered, only endured, concerning how many symbols in one's own life are preserved precisely because they no longer demand anything inwardly, and how much inner conflict has been displaced into anxiety, fatigue, or emptiness as a result. Jung never suggested that this tension could be resolved permanently, because consciousness does not evolve toward final harmony, but oscillates between periods of stability and disruption, forgetting and remembering, misunderstanding and partial recognition. In this sense, the idea that Jesus was misinterpreted does not accuse history of failure, but reveals a repeating human pattern, where symbolic truth approaches awareness, destabilizes it, and is then reshaped into something tolerable enough to survive. Whether that symbol becomes alive again is not a matter of doctrine, effort, or method, but of readiness, and readiness itself cannot be forced or manufactured. What remains, then, is not certainty, but attentiveness, a willingness to notice where something still feels unresolved, unfinished, or quietly disturbing, without rushing to explain it away. And perhaps that lingering unease, that refusal of closure, is closer to the symbolic function itself than any interpretation that claims to finally understand it.